Star Trek Discovery is back. Well, depending on where you are, I suppose. I'm sure you've heard the news by now about Paramount Plus and whatever and all that stuff, and that's the reason this video has been delayed. I wasn't sure that I wanted to cover a show that had been handled so badly just before the season launch, but I guess I'm gonna. So as always, I'm Alan, this is the Geek in Review, and let's get to it. So after the mixed bag of season 3, let's be honest, the burn finale or the burn reveal was, Hopefully season 4 of Discovery will pick up the pace a little bit and have a little bit of tighter storytelling. But as this is the first episode, we will have to wait and see. So it picks up with Michael and Book on a planet of not too friendly or intelligent fairy people, and there's a misunderstanding. We get a Star Wars style chase, and this is a strong attention grabbing opening, and I do wonder how much of the volume they're using in this, because it does look pretty good, and I'll talk about the CGI later on. But yeah, the very Star Wars feel with the whole let's get out the way and then jumping on a ship and having that whole adventure. And also the bit when they highlight that there's always a cliff. The line that popped into my head there was, is this jumping the shark? So I don't know, is highlighting the cliff the Star Trek Discovery version of jumping the shark? I guess we're going to have to wait and see. And we get a few changes on the ship as well, not just the uniforms, which if you bought the cosplay at the end of season 3, I hope you demanded a refund as soon as you found out the uniforms were changing. And we also get Reese in charge, but it doesn't look as if he is the first officer. But the crew do seem that they are all working quite well and tight together, and we get a new crew member, Lieutenant Christopher, who's filling in for Bryce. But the one thing that annoyed me about this opening was the species were just so ridiculously stupid. They didn't understand, well, a lot, and they tried to... But my main problem with this opening was that the species were so stupid. They didn't understand like nicknames or the concept of a pet, and even after they couldn't understand anything, for some reason Michael and the Federation want to give these idiots warp drive. But Berman does seem to be at home in the big chair, and I hope if Reese turns out to be number 1, you'll get more to do, because let's be honest, in 4 years Reese and Bryce have done absolutely nothing. We need to get a bit of backstory, we need to get a bit of focus on these guys at some point. And pretty much straight away, once we're done with the introductions, we dive back into the Kelpian homeworld. And man, I know I said I'd talk about the CGI, and this is another one that looks absolutely fantastic. The Baul, the set, the rest of the Kelpians, even the makeup. Su'Kal looks a little bit different, his skin looks a little bit darker, but maybe that's the fact that he's living outside now as opposed to in a ship for the last 30 or 40 years. But this scene in general, oh, what an introduction to Saru. Brilliant stuff. So the Baul and the Kelpians seem to be working together, and Saru is now considered an elder on the council when I don't think he's that old. He's only in his 20s or 30s. I don't think he's mentioned how old he is. And they are discussing about the dangers of Su'Kal, but apparently as long as he's not in the nebula, he's not a danger to anyone. And Saru seems to be pretty happy about the way things are going and the way that things have turned out on camera. But he does want to reach back out to the stars again, and he feels that pull. And Su'Kal reminds him that he doesn't really need Saru around anymore. It's been about 5 or 6 months, and he's set up his own life in the Kelpian homeworld. And speaking of homeworlds, Book is going back to his home planet as well. And while this is going on, we find out that Starfleet Academy is reopening after a century of being closed. So who are all these Starfleet officers that we've seen in the last season? Is it a sort of generational thing? Like, you know, back in the old days, medieval times, your father was a stonemason, you were a stonemason, so they were just inheriting their ranks and their roles? I think we need a little bit of discovery on that. And obviously I will need to say that I was wrong. Kovacs isn't the Federation president. We've known about that for a while. It's a woman called Raylink. And we meet her at this Starfleet Academy ceremony, and she talks about a new start and how they're going to start exploring again instead of just surviving. And they even unveil the Archer space dock, and we get the old Enterprise theme, or the Archer theme, which was the one that rolled on the Enterprise credits back in the day, which was nice. And, you know, after all the sort of Easter eggs and stuff we get thrown in Lower Decks, it's nice that we just get 1 or 2 nods and we're not overwhelmed in this show. But one crew member I did miss out is Tilly, who's now a lieutenant, and she doesn't really seem to be that happy. She's not the sort of happy-go-lucky Tilly that we've had in the last few seasons. I'll explore a little bit more on why that is later on. But they get a distress call from a deep space station near Quajon, which is Book's home world, and the president wants to come with them to find out what's going on, which I thought this was very odd, and I also thought it was very odd as well that Vance didn't say anything, but there's a little bit of a reveal with that later on. So Book's back home on Quajon, going through this ceremony with his nephew, and he's explaining how things work on the planet essentially, and he sees birds fall from the sky and for some reasons decides to investigate, because he needs something to do, and that's all this scene is. It's all just filler and sort of setup that could have been done better. I think they did waste a lot of time in this episode on these scenes with Book, when they just could have had him do something else, or maybe developed a relationship with him and Michael, or seen him interact with other members of the Discovery crew. We didn't really need to see this, did we? But back to Discovery, and they jump in and find that the station is spinning out of control. We meet Adira finally, who's now an ensign, and Adira is basically the new Tilly. They're nervous, they're chattering, they're kind of awkward, and they're still seeing grey, and I do wonder how exactly does this work, because they're chatting to themselves for a good 30 seconds to a minute on the bridge while the rest of the crew is going about their business. So do people see that, or is it all imaginary? Is it in their head? I think we're going to need a bit of explaining on that one as well, folks. But they send an away team of Tilly and Adira over to the station, and they start to repair it when all sort of hell breaks loose. As usual, the station commander, when it's a guest commander or a guest captain, is a bit of a dickhead and not the most competent, and the transporters get hit so they can't get the crew off. Now, Michael being Michael wants to go outside in a worker bee and help Tilly escape, and the president questions why the captain is leaving the bridge, and yeah, that's perfectly valid, you can't argue with that. But that's sort of one of the main issues that I have with this show, especially Michael Burnham now being captain, is if you tell the show from one character's point of view, they're always going to have to be the main focus, and you can't keep throwing the captain into adventure every week. I don't mind Michael as a character, but I do think focusing a Star Trek show on one single character doesn't allow the rest of the characters to breathe and get expanded. For example, Bryce and Reese, we still know absolutely nothing about these guys after almost 4 years, whereas in the Next Generation, most of the characters had a bit of a backstory by now. But yeah, I do wonder how much Michael's going to get involved in the action and leave the captain's chair to go off and do something during the season, but as always, we're going to have to wait and find out. But she gets hit while she's working in the worker pod and immediately gets ejected, and this scene looks cool. In fact, the CGI all the way through this episode is about 5 stars up from the last season. They seem to be really taken on board and got what fans have been saying, because Discovery has had a lot of issues and the CGI has been one of them. Hopefully we won't see any ships that shouldn't be in the wrong century this season either. But back on the station, the commander's freaking out because he's a guest role and he pulls a phaser on Tilly. The president manages to talk him down, and then there's this weird exchange between Mike and the president, and it happens again later on in the episode, but I'm not sure if this is indicating that the president's necessarily a bad guy or the villain of the season. But everyone makes it back on board, including the guest actor, but of course he gets killed in the crash. These yellow shirts are the new red shirts, and hey, it's Star Trek. But back at Starfleet HQ, find out that they are working on new technology like adapting the Spore drive and giving Voyager a new Pathfinder drive, and that's why the president was on this mission, to keep an eye on Michael, because she's looking for a captain of the new Voyager, and she doesn't think that Michael's ready. And again, that's another fair point. She's only been a captain for 5 or 6 months at this point, and Michael kind of spitefully says, I think it was quite bitchy, that I wouldn't leave even if you offered me the job because I'm quite comfortable here. Yeah, I mean, you could say it was the same way that Riker done it in Best of Both Worlds, but the way that Michael snapped at her, I kind of thought that was out of line, especially when it was her superior. And then Book shows up at the end and we find out that Quajon has been destroyed somehow, so this is going to be this anomaly that seems to be setting things off. We've not got any information on what's causing it so far, but as long as it's not an upset Kelpian, I think the fans will be happy. I really liked this episode. As I say, the CG and the new sets and the way they used the virtual sets were brilliant. I like the new characters of the Federation President. I'm not too keen on them making Adira the new Tilly and what they're doing with Tilly, because she now kind of feels redundant. I don't know what the relationship's going to be like with her and Michael in the show. When Saru comes back, it might change and it might be the gang back together. I don't know about that. We'll have to wait and see. But yeah, it was a strong opening all in all. And the show does feel like it's firmly found its feet, but not everyone's going to be happy with the direction it's going in. The actors are great. And yeah, I think I'm going to stick with Discovery. I'm just obviously bummed about the Paramount Plus situation.